There are certain places on the earth where the laws of physics behave very differently. We are electromagnetic beings. If you change the frequency of the local environment, your body starts to attune itself to that environment, and you start slipping between reality. The local spirit of place will pick up on that, and they'll provide you some interesting information. There was a parallel civilization that built the original temples and knew about the laws of nature and how to bend those rules, and that's why they did incredible things. Not because it was an alien technology. A god is anyone who understands the spirit of nature. Any human being can become a god. The temples mark the locations where the veil is thinner with another level of reality. Adjacent to the pyramids of Giza, you'll see some serious water damage, and people miss this all the time. Lemuria was actually a string of big islands at the end of the Ice Age, and all that vanished. Right now, everything's falling apart because we're moving to another level of experience. The Maya know about this. As the window closes and you're not hitting the critical mass, the earth is going to show you who's boss. We are part of this big cycle that is designed for a specific experience. But here's the fun part. The intention is in the words, and the local spirit of place will pick up on that, and they'll provide you some interesting information. And one of those situations happened very early on in my life, where I was just studying this over 30 years ago, and I went for my first trip to Egypt, and I was with a group. We fix the problems that people leave behind in sacred places. And we clear the energy, clear the rubbish, the metaphysical rubbish, and then we ask a question: can we get something back? Anything that we need to, improve ourselves. And I remember being in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. Lights went out, complete darkness, and we were toning. There's four people in there. And all these people just came out of the stones and just surrounded us, about 8 feet tall, dressed in these beautiful white robes, beautiful thing. That changed my life. That got me to quit my day job right there, because I knew that there was something going on here that defied logical explanation. But it was such a real experience that it shaped so much of my work since then. And I've gone on from there to experience similar things at other places on the planet. Since you're in Australia, not too far from you, over in New Zealand on the South Island, there's a place called the Birthplace of the Gods. And that is not overselling it. That's actually underselling it. It's one of the oldest, it's a natural landscape temple where the stones have been shaped by human hands to represent certain spiritual teachings. So this dates back to the time of the Waitaha, after they moved from Easter Island. They're still in New Zealand. Only about 8,000 registered Waitaha left. Not many of them, but they're lovely people. And you'll know who many of them are because they're lighter skinned than Maori, and they're also blonde. And their oral tradition goes back 12,000 years, back when Easter Island was an archipelago, which it isn't anymore. And they talked about the gods called the Urukeu, the red-headed people that used to live there. And I did some a travel there many, many years ago, my first visit, not really understanding what was there, just sensing that there was something special. So, and I'm glad I didn't do any homework before I went, because it would have prejudiced my experience. And I just remember sitting next to the tutelary goddess of the site, massive stone on top of the summit called Marotini. And it still looks, under a certain light, you can still see the places where the eyeballs used to be, the nose, the mouth. It was shaped by human hands over 12,000 years ago. And you can still see the bits where the mauls used to hit the stone. So in the winter, when the lighting is low, you can see the slight curvature where, these limestone rocks used to pound this big piece of limestone. But you can still make out the features of this lioness. And I just remember standing there looking at the valley and looking at the time around the Ice Age when these unusual mammals were running down the hills. Everything was covered with trees. It's like I just took drugs and suddenly I'm having a vision, but it's not. The vision was absolutely real. And that was just your body, because we are electromagnetic beings. So if you change the frequency of the local environment, your body starts to attune itself to that environment, and you start slipping between sort of realities. You start having one foot in the next reality. And that's what was happening. I was being shown a vision of what the valley used to look like when these people, the Urukeu, used to be there before they intermarried with the Waitaha. And it's one of the most incredible experiences, because it began to shape my understanding of that culture. And in my second last book that I wrote, called The Missing Lands, I actually spent a lot of time talking about ancient New Zealand which got me into a lot of trouble with a lot of Maori, of course, especially the ones that don't understand the true history of the Maori tradition, which talks about how when they arrived in New Zealand, there's people already living there, which is, of course, politically very dangerous to talk about, but it is true. They are not the original people that lived there, and a lot of them that have read their traditions, they know this. So that's my get out of jail card. I always say, well, I know a lot of Maori people, including several elders, that said, no, we were not the first here. There was people living here a long time ago, and it's backed up by archaeological evidence. So this is another place that's very close, where the borders between reality are very, very thin. Not far from Australia. Just fly down to Christchurch, take a 2.5 hour drive, or if you're a European like me, 1 hour, and try to avoid the police. Because I'm in a hurry to get to these places. And you'll have the most incredible experience just walking around, sensing the environment. There's nothing there except beautiful nature and most incredible valley. But that's just some of the things that I've experienced over time. And like I said, I put quite a few of these things into the book because I keep forgetting that I have so many unusual experiences with the management, as I call it.
How there's gonna be someone tuning in going, "How does he know that he's not just having a vision that's a hallucination?" Is it because you've collectively experienced this in the presence of others that have corroborated what you're experiencing in the same time? Or, like, how do you know it's not just a hallucination in your mind?
Before when I started, it was because it was a collective experience. So the one in the Great Pyramid, there's three other witnesses that were there, and they're all the different levels of spiritual development. We're in a darkened room, and there's four people that saw exactly what I saw, and they experienced exactly the same thing. So you can't make that up. I didn't even volunteer to say what I experienced. I just said, "Did anybody see what I saw up there?" And the next guy picks up the story, and then the next guy fills in the other details, and we're all self-referencing, so you can't make that up. And after a while, you begin to, if you get the right teachers, which I've been very fortunate to have, you begin to realize that there's a time when you want something so much, it will happen. It's a product of your own imagination and your own need for fulfillment. That's not the experience. And you should also shouldn't do alcohol or any drugs when you go to sacred space because you don't need it. The drug is the temple. That's what the whole purpose is. So once I separated fact from fiction, I could now approach a sacred site without any expectation of anything happening, and I just go, okay, well, I'm looking for this. I hope that my questions will be answered, and I just go walkabout. I expect nothing in return, and before I've done my perambulation around the temple, 3 hours later, I got a notepad filled with ideas, visions, experiences, sounds, and I write these things down. And I think, well, this would make a great idea for a book. Now I have to go to the library and research it and look at archaeological peer-reviewed papers, and it's all there. That's the hard part. You've got to go and dig this stuff up to back up what you experience. Otherwise, writing a book would be so easy. I can just say, well, I experienced this in a stone circle in Scotland, which I did, or I experienced this in some other place, which I did. But to give credence to the work, you have to give people who are maybe skeptical a kind of a scientific foundation, and that's what I do: is to bring the science to back up the experience to prove that there's something going on at Sacred Space. So there are checks and balances in the work that I do.
It's fascinating to consider that different people have different awarenesses around the different sacred sites around the planet. One of the ones that I wanted to scratch the itch on with you today is they talk about the Earth having multiple different chakra points of its own, and having these energetic centers. Have you considered this in your work? And part of me wants to really understand, like, how come there are energetic points? What's going on, like, behind the veil, like metaphysically? Why are there certain points on the
Mm.
planet, and it's not just one big, like, geodesic energetic point? Like, why are there these unique sites where we can go visit, and what's going on behind them metaphysically?
Oh, I don't know why. I didn't design the planet, that gets me out of jail immediately. But I can tell you how it happens, and there's a science behind it. So we had to wait until the 20th century to figure this out. The Hopi actually had a great way to describe this whole thing. They said the creation myth talks about how the creator makes the earth, and then says to the first human, go to the South Pole with a drum, and you hear the heartbeat of the Earth Mother, and you beat the beat on the drum, and when the two are in synchronicity, what will happen is that the Earth will send these rays of energy to the surface, and the Earth will become abundant with life. But they said there are some places that were more abundant than the others, and they call them the spots of the fawn. Beautiful way to describe the fact that there are hot spots on the body of the earth, and that's what makes these places different. And now we have the technology to go to these sacred places and put in electrodes and other expensive gizmos and go, oh, wait a minute. So at night, the energy around the temples dies down as though someone's going to sleep, and just before dawn, all the electromagnetic frequency of the land around the temple starts to attract itself to the temple. And just the moment when the sun crosses the horizon at sunrise, the energy that's been going around the temple suddenly floods into the temple, like the door's been opened, at twice the frequency of the surrounding land. There's no one on the planet that can explain how a bunch of large rocks or even a henge monument can move the energy of the earth, corral it, and then double the frequency into the temple at sunrise. So we now know, we can measure that there are certain places on the earth where the laws of physics, as we understand them, behave very differently. They behave like collecting points, and the energy is enhanced. This is why so many people like going to do ceremony at sunrise at sacred places, because they may not understand the method behind it, but they can sense it because your body is your best device. You are electromagnetic, and you're also influenced by all of these forces around the earth. So if you have your antenna a little bit extended and you're not a skeptic, because a skeptic will block the actual experience because you program yourself to say, no matter what happens here, I'm not going to believe it. Well, that's okay. But if you go there with an open frame of mind and you can sense the environment, you know something's different. Something's interacting with your body. And that's when you begin to have these experiences. There was one of many incredible cases where in 1973 there was some scientists that went to the Roll Right Stone Circle in Britain, and it's very, very worn, and not many people go there, but it's very, very beautiful place. And they dragged this magnetometer over the actual surface of the ground. Now, it's a big sheet of metal that basically sends pulses into the earth. A signal comes back, and then there's an electronic printout on the computer about 50 feet away. And people have been saying, especially dowsers, were saying, well, there's a telluric current that flows like a serpent into the three stones that form the entrance to the circle, and the energy goes like a big spiral into the center of the stone circle. Now, any dowser would understand that that's the truth. Now, most people will say, well, dowsing, I don't know about that, bent coat hangers. Well, it turns out that the machine dragged along the ground brings out this beautiful computer printout of this line, which is the energy, the electromagnetic current, flowing through the freestones and behaving like a great big spiral into the center, and it goes boom to the center of the earth. So there's an actual printout, and it was published as a peer-review experiment. And this is one of just many experiences. There's another one that was done in Britain where they put electrodes all around Stonehenge and Avebury, so two of the most important stone circles on the planet. And they found, yes, it's true, that the Earth does go to sleep at night and then it wakens again. But that at that point, the stones are actually designed in a certain way, in a certain geometry. And also the choice of stone is very important to attract that energy, to get it to flow in a certain direction. And the stone circles become a repository of that energy. So you keep doing that again and again, thousands of years upon thousands of years. And now you have a sacred place because the energy has been built up over time. It's in the stone itself. So we now have evidence to prove, using very expensive equipment, what people can sense naturally and have been doing so, and specifically in the outback in Australia, where Aboriginal people never built anything. They don't build sacred sites. They can sense the sacred site. They can see it. Sometimes they'll just walk through the outback and they'll suddenly turn right for no reason because they can hear the song imprinted in the jakiri, which is like a piece of magnetic strip, where the last person recorded their song and their story, so they can hear the previous song. And they'll travel for 60 miles across a featureless desert, and they go to the sacred site, and there's still nothing there to see. But you can sense that there's something about it that's potent, like an invisible pregnant woman. You know there's something very powerful here. And that was also part of a college experiment that was done, I believe, by the University of Melbourne, if I'm not mistaken, a long time ago.
It's interesting because listening to you speak, there seems to be a vast amount of evidence sort of pouring into this space right now, and yet it doesn't seem to be mainstream work. It's your work is considered somewhat like, it's taking you to sort of share this knowledge with the world for people to come to it. Why is it
Yeah.
intentionally suppressed, or is it like what are your thoughts around some of that
I
stuff?
don't
Like,
think
is
so. I mean, I've worked in media for many years, and I know there's no conspiracy unless you're working with extreme media at the extreme end of the spectrum. It's just what they think the editor thinks is going to be of interest to people, and sometimes it'll squeeze through on page 55 of the daily newspaper. If there's a day when there's not much happening, these things ought to be given much greater prominence, but they're not, because most editors that run these news departments just don't think that the people are interested in this kind of stuff. They think these are all burial places, despite the fact that only 6% of all the megalithic sites of the world that have been dug up have any human remains. And even then, they're put there long after the place was actually built. So for them, it's something that happened 4, 5, 6, 7,000 years ago. They're just places where tourists go to have a picnic. It's not high on the agenda of terrorist attacks or problems with tariffs and stupid people running countries, which I won't mention any names right now since I'm in America. But you know who I'm talking about. God, it's like a clown show here. It's unbelievable. If anybody's listening from New Zealand, I'm still trying to get in. Anyway, but yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I don't know why. You have to go and look at specialist papers, and a lot of the research that I do get is from specialist papers to do with history or archaeology, and even then, they're not given much prominence because they just don't want to believe it. So many of the academics stake their reputations on so many places being burial sites, and they don't want to move forward. You see, it's not that they're wrong deliberately; it's just that the fact that they were complacent with the information that they were getting. They'd find bones in one location, and then they'd figured every sacred place then is a burial place. No, 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 no. That may have been a burial place because you found people buried there. It may not have been the original reason why it was built, and that happens a lot. You can't treat every single sacred place on the face of the earth as being for the same reason. For the same reason that some are healing sites and some are non-healing sites, is to do with the energy, the mineral content of the water, and other factors that make it so. So they stake their reputations on a certain version of the truth, and they'll stick to it regardless of the fact if independent people like me are bringing information to the table and saying, the theory is untenable because of this new information that we have. This is evidence. We need to move the theory forward. And they can't handle that. So it's a bit of an ego involved here. And then we get branded as pseudoscientists and so forth. But when you pull these people aside, they'll say, actually, the independent researchers are doing much better work because we don't have an agenda. We're just asking for the truth. And I'll talk to anybody, climatologists, mythologists, folklorists. I don't care what kind of ology they're practicing, as long as it brings something new to the table. And I can look at all the bits and pieces on the table and go, let's see how we can make better sense of the past because I've got more information to draw from. Not one piece of information. I have 40 pieces of information, and that gives me greater clarity into the mind of the ancestors. Is it the truth? No. Only the people involved in any event know the truth. But the more information you can gather, the closer you are to finding out what the truth was. And that's the big difference between independent researchers and the academics.
Inspired Souls, I wanted to thank all of you that are subscribed to the podcast. Thank you so much for your incredible love and support. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. All it takes is to hit the subscribe button below, and as I'm saying the word subscribe, it's lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. Episodes like this coming out twice a week help us championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet through your subscription to the channel. Thank you. Freddie, there's a parallel sort of arc in my head around your other work, which has explored human beings' time even before, the planet's habitation before the Ice Age even, right? And so I'm looking at this and kind of wondering now at this juncture in the conversation, these mystical sites, are they programmed by humans or other beings to be what they are potently, or does nature manifest them the way that they are? Is it a combination of both? And then also, like, what are the elements that are there some hallmark features that sort of make a site a sacred site in your opinion?
It's all of the above. Sacred sites have been going on for thousands of years. I mean, the oldest one I can think of is Gunung Padang, which is this pyramid in Indonesia, which the archaeologists don't want to talk about because the dates are very uncomfortable. I mean, they've done core samples drilled out of there, and they show quite clearly by an archaeologist who's been completely destroyed by the archaeological mafia, as I call it, that it's over 20,000 years old. That's not going to sit very well in all the books that we wrote about the past. Next thing you can look at is Tiwanaku up in Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. All the stones of its quadrangle are aligned to the positions of the sky as it looked in 15,000 BC. There's a problem right there. And all you have to do is listen to the stories that were commemorated by people like the Aboriginal culture in Australia. I mean, they remember when a meteorite hit the outback a million years ago, and then they were proved to be correct. And they rolled their eyes and they said, "We got older stories than that." I mean, I love their sense of humor. It's so dry. It's almost British, isn't it? Oh, we got older stories than a million years. What do you want to know? And that's what I like doing. I want to hear from the people whose ancestors were closer to the events than any European academic. Okay, not because the European academics are wrong per se. It's because their people were closer to the event. You see, and it goes through the experience is remembered in folklore and in tradition, oral tradition from one generation to the next. And when I collect these around the world, they all come together and they begin to overlap. Now, if we were not going around the world talking to each other, let's say 8,000 years ago, how come the stories all overlap? And sometimes they finish and then they pick up in another country somewhere else. It shouldn't be happening. And the one thing that keeps coming up again and again and again is that as hunter gatherers are now beginning to get their act together, and we're in the middle of the Ice Age, we have a parallel civilization all around the earth that basically were the gods. And then you have to ask yourself, well, are these real or metaphysical beings? Well, they were real people. The Sumerians called them half human, half divine, and they were human-like but not quite human. That's a lovely phrase. And it turns out, from the evidence that we have from giants' graves in Europe, they were 8 feet tall. I don't know how much that is in meters, about 2.7 meters maybe, around there. So very, very tall. And they were light-skinned compared to Polynesian people and any other people on the planet. And they had blonde hair with green eyes and red hair with blue eyes. And I hear this from every single culture on the planet. Even the Maori talk about this. In fact, the first Europeans that arrived in Polynesia in the 15th century, they said there was a lot of blonde people in Tahiti. How the hell did that happen? How the Caucasians ended up in Tahiti? And they said, well, we intermarried with the gods at the end of the flood, at the end of the Ice Age, because they didn't survive either. We had to interbreed in order to keep the bloodlines alive. And I hear this everywhere I go. So for me, that's very real. And when I start hearing about people saying, well, these are the people that originally built the original temples using big stones. By the time we get to the time of the Inca, for example, we got little stones and these things fall apart in every earthquake. And then you got the Europeans showing up with their mortar and their bricks. That falls apart every 5 years. So we're actually regressing in terms of temple building. So whoever was building the original sites knew about the laws of nature and how to bend those rules. And that's another phrase I hear all the time. They knew how to work with nature. They knew how to bend the rules. And that's why they did incredible things. Not because it was an alien technology. It's alien to us because today we're so removed from nature that we don't understand it. And yet, if you look at the stories of the temples being built overnight, using big stones, and there was sound involved, either a trumpet, a musical instrument, or the voice was also telling the stones to move through the air. You hear this in many cultures. Well, in Princeton, back in the 80s, they looked at this story and they said, well, what if it's possible that the reason why they brought these stones from such a long way away, sometimes as much as 400 miles away, is because of the content. Now, the content of these stones is a specific type of quartz, and it's a lot of it. So they found the quartz, they put it in this tube, and they kept throwing sound at it in a laboratory. And I don't know if the website's still up because these people have died of extreme old age now. But back in the 80s and the 90s, when I found this on their website, it led me to it was one of the reasons why I wrote my second book, actually, was that they found the right frequency to throw at the lump of quartz and it started to levitate above the table in the laboratory. That's how we know that these things are real. So there was a parallel civilization that built the original temples, and we've been rebuilding things ever since then. Pyramids of Giza, 10,500 BC, they get hit by a flood. They're pretty big. They're not going to go anywhere. But if you go there, and I've been there 28 times now, and you look at what's left, you can see that there's been some retrofitting. There have been other things that are done to take out stones that are weathered by a lot of water, and new stones are being put back in. It's a constant rebuilding and the rehabbing project. And if you look at the temples adjacent to the pyramids of Giza, you'll see some serious water damage. And it doesn't take even someone with a degree in geology. And I've got a geology 101. Even that alone, I can tell when something has been worn by sitting in a very fast flowing current of water. And it's right there next to the Great Pyramid. And people miss this all the time. They look at the pyramid, but not the temple next to it. So this is what was going on. These gods, which basically a god is anyone who understands the spirit of nature, water. If I want to look at water, understand water and how it works and how it doesn't, I become the god of water. That's how it happens. So any human being, any individual can become a god. That's what it means. We've been taught to look at God from a different lens because of the Judeo-Christian tradition, which is completely wrong because by then they had no idea what they were talking about because they borrowed their information from people who already had experience of this thousands of years earlier, and what they were reading made no sense to them. So there was this parallel civilization here on Earth, and they too didn't fare well during the end of the Ice Age, but the remains are all around.
I do wonder if there were even sites pre them, like you said, like New Zealand has some of these really incredible um, sites which are just formed via nature. Like nature just has its own emanation of like
Yeah.
what's going on here. There's
And some of the sites are natural as well. Like I said, the birthplace of the gods, it's a natural landscape temple where they took the actual stones that were there. Some may have been moved, by the way, because they don't look like they were standing there originally. If you follow the original pattern of erosion, that shouldn't be happening. That outcrop should not be there. But you can see under the right circumstances, they've been shaped by human hands to portray a story, telling. And I didn't realize this until I read the oral tradition that was published of the Waitaha sometime later and found out that they said, oh, it was our ancestors that actually came here with these molds and they went chock, 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 and they shaped these stones to portray a teaching. That's why when you go to this stone, you think, oh, this stone represents blah, blah. Well, yes, it does, because it's still shaped like that. So we went from that, from the Aboriginal culture of understanding the spirit of place and sensing sacred plates without having anything built there to, oh, well, we'll take some shapes on the land and then we'll shape them to teach people about the teachings. And then after that, as we're losing the plot even more, we better build some pyramids and some big temples with big stones to make sure that when people lose the plot in the 21st century, they'll know where to go to find this stuff. You can sense it, feel it, understand it, intellectualize it, but the energy is still there. So you can see that one thing develops from a natural algorithm and then it becomes a man-made interpretation of nature.
well, I wonder how much of even setting up some of these sites in a bit more, there's a better word than this, garish fashion, is maybe even in and of itself a message from the site. Sometimes there might be, communications that come through. It's like, hey, this area, someone gets the download in terms of, in the future, people are going to
Oh,
need to
absolutely.
see
And that's
this.
why they're designed the way they are. They are thinning the veil. The temples mark the locations where the veil is thinner with another level of reality, without exception, on the face of the planet. We can now know where the telluric currents are moving, and whenever you find a crossing of telluric currents, you'll find a temple, or even a standing stone just saying X marks the spot. And because you're made of the same stuff, if you go there in a state of openness and reverence, and just sit there and be mindful, you'll pick up a lot of information. That's where a lot of people get their work done. Half of my work comes from standing next to a large upright rock and going, I wonder what this can teach me. And boom, before I'm done, I've got things coming out. I thought, that sounds interesting. How can I prove this? And then you get coincidence. Someone sends me a book, or there's an email with a link to something. And I thought, I was looking for that. Right. That's exactly what I was thinking of. And this is how the magic works. And then I've got a foundation of, scientific explanation upon which I can build a metaphysical foundation on. But originally, it was my experience at a specific place that led me on that voyage of discovery. This is where what I call them the listening posts for the management. When we don't remember that the management is always talking to us every minute of the day, we go to these special places where the veil is thin, and we go, "Oh, that's an interesting idea," and then you take credit. But of course, the manager is going, "Well, wait a minute, we gave you that idea." So I always credit the management because that's originally where it came from. And now I'm getting more of a handle on it. Now I can go and pick up the information myself. But that's 30 years of interacting with sacred spaces. I know the language. I know what they're up to. I know their sense of humor. And it's very mischievous, by the way. So for me, it becomes like an extended family. I know where I'm going to get when I get to a specific place. I don't take it for granted because I don't know everything, and you shouldn't do. But that's because I develop a relationship with this work, and anybody can do that as well. It's a bit like driving a car. The more you do it, the more you get used to it.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
he's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing. And Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. You've talked about spiritual development as well. The question is more around spiritual development, our attunement, and being able to sense into the sites. Because I think for some people, I mean, a stone is a stone is a stone is a stone, and for me, things started to shift a little bit when someone started to talk to me about decay and timelines. Because, even looking at a crystal that some people wear around their neck, and, I was like, crystals, really? Like, do we really think there's something going on there? And I was like, well, take a look at you. How long's your lifetime? And it's like, well, maybe 80, 100, 120, depending on how science goes. Sure. And it's like, how long's the lifetime of some trees? And I'm like, ooh, okay, I definitely believe the tree's alive, and 500, depending on what type of trees and species we're talking about. And it's like, so a rock is also, or a crystal is also got a lifetime and a lifespan, and it's carrying an awareness to what it's witnessed over its time. And you do feel this when you go into the presence of trees, but I think that has been a real easy access point for me to sort of start to open my mind into
Yeah.
like, oh, what's going on in these spaces. And so, I mean, in some ways, even mentioning crystal and stone, it is the material world manifest, so it is somewhat material, but then also you're talking about spiritual openness and awareness. I just wanted to dial into the fidelity that's required spiritually to be able to understand some of these things.
Oh, actually, there's some science behind that. In fact, it's a very funny story. I was in Karnak in Brittany, one of the greatest concentrations of megaliths on the planet, if not the biggest concentrations of megaliths anywhere. And I was going by this store in town, which usually sells buckets and spades for people to go and make sand castles on the beach. And you know that unmistakable smell of old paper? It comes from old books. I thought, I'll smell something here worth looking at. And I just marched into this point of the store. Right at the back of the store, behind some beach blankets, there was a little 56-page pamphlet in French called "The Rocks Are Alive." And I thought, oh, that's coming home with me. And it was written by an electrical engineer who was skeptically inquiring about all of these megaliths. And he went around prodding all the stones with his electrical devices, and he found out, and to paraphrase his research, that the rocks are alive. They actually breathe all day long. And then, they bring, depending on the shape, like the menhir, which is the classic standing stone, it behaves like a coil or a solenoid in the car. And the energy goes around the coil, and it stores the energy, and it dissipates the energy every 80 minutes. So the energy goes into the quartz in the stone, and that's the important thing. It's the quartz in the stone. It's a piezoelectric material. Under the right circumstances, the stone will actually store the information. And he was able to prove it. He said, yeah, you can actually see the buildup of energy in these stones, and then you see it discharging every 18 minutes or so. And then it builds up again. So if you're there at the wrong time, at the wrong place, and you touch it and you ground it, you'll get an electric shock. It only takes one logical step from that to go, well, if I can imprint my intention into the quartz, then the stone will remember my intention. Yes, it does. And we have experiments from Princeton in the 80s again, where they took a room of 20 people and they were instructed to send their intention to a box in the middle of the room, which is basically a computer that had a computerized drum beat. And they actually succeeded in changing the drum beat of a machine. That's the power of 20 people with an electric impulse called intention, properly guided to a specific desire, to a specific object. You can change the outcome of a machine. Well, the machine is based in the same way as a standing stone. It has iron, it has copper, it has quartz and silica, and that's why your computer and mine, we can talk to each other across space and time, because there's silica, and if I touch a key, something will happen on my screen. Well, that key is your intention, sends an electronic pulse to the stone, and the stone remembers. So the next person that comes along to a standing stone picks up the information from the information that was put there by the people who put the stone up there in the first place. That's how it works. So we now know that places like stone circles behave like batteries, and they concentrate the energy, and then that gets released as well. The passage mounts also behave like big conveyor belts of information and energy storage. And the places where they put the temples were also important, because they always marked the places where the telluric currents happened to flow through the earth. So we knew this back in the day. We could sense it. We could see it. I can see the telluric currents now, having done this for 30 years. For me, it's second nature, because I've become so sensitive to the environment that I can actually pick up the information before I even got there. And I can see these things moving like serpents along the ground. It's very disconcerting. But the point is that they were designed and put there to remind you of what you can do when you don't believe in yourself. And that's also in many of the folklore stories around the world, that the temple is here. Even Jesus said that 2,000 years ago. It's all plagiarism, basically. Nothing new under the sun. And they said, yeah, the temple is in here. The temple of God is in here. You can do anything without having to leave your body. You go inside and then to go outside. It's a very Buddhist idea, very Zen. But when you forget that you can do it, you forget that you're a god, and you have these incredible abilities, then our ancestors built these temples with ridiculous stones because they're not going to move. You have to blow them up before you can get rid of one of these temples. So they mark the place where the thinning of the veil happens to be, as I call it, a self-help center. So when you forget that you can't do it, or you lack the confidence, you go to one of these sites and you go, oh, of course, yes, I can do it. It really is that simple. But we're so far away from nature that we forgot that we can do it by ourselves. So someone did us a huge favor a long time ago by marking the places on Earth where magic really does happen.
And some of it's, I guess, when you tune in, like it is kind of hidden in plain sight. Like, like you mentioning even just our devices, our PCs, our ability to connect, our mobile phones, and then it's called Silica, like Silicon Valley. Like it's all there. It just, just tune in just a little bit in terms of what's going on. So one of the key things is you've mentioned Telluric currents. Can you describe what a Telluric current is and how different this is to a song line or a ley line, or is this literally the same thing? Yeah, I'd love to learn more.
It's the same as a song line, same as a jalkiri. It's the Earth's electromagnetic currents of energy. And that's why they're called the serpent lines, or the lung mei, or the fairy paths, the paths of the fair folk. And basically, they are everywhere. I'm sitting on one right now, by the way. It crosses my apartment. And incredibly, this is the only place where I can put my desk. So, of course, I'm getting fed by this energy and I'm feeding it as well through my work. And so many healers and people that do this kind of work also find themselves in buildings or properties where the telluric current happens to flow through it. And that's where they do their work. So we can sense this stuff. But they are naturally occurring. They're everywhere. Some of them are pretty thin. Some of them can be as much as 30 meters wide. There are 8 of them going to the Great Pyramid of Giza, for example. Some of them are very complex, and they have masculine and a negative polarity. Masculine and feminine polarity, just like an electrical current has positive and negative terminals. And they are everywhere. They literally are what we have in our body, we call arteries and veins, that makes the iron flow through the blood that gives us life. Well, the Earth has the same thing. We just can't see it. So back in the day when we could easily see this, okay, it's right over there. I'm just going to stand on that conveyor belt and I'm going to get what I call the tingly winglies. I'm going to make life a lot easier for myself. And then when we'll forget that where they are and we can't see them, we'll build a standing stone or a stone circle or a temple to make sure that we know where they are. So that's what a telluric current really is. It's just an electromagnetic ribbon that flows through the land.
This information is sort of re-emerging as a bit of and I see this in many spaces. Maybe I am, in the echo chamber of the inspired evolution. So I've got to be cognizant of that a little bit as well. But there seems to be this spiritual renaissance that we're currently underway with. In your thoughts, why are we ready for this spiritual renaissance? Or is this what's really required for what's next? Because there's, it's a bit of a time ahead of us. What's going on here with this information now coming to us?
Oh, the big picture. There are 2 things going on. One, it's your own picture, your incarnation story, which only you know, and you came here to be better, perfect yourself. If you're perfect, you wouldn't bother incarnating. So that's bad news for anybody with a big ego that just joined the program.
Speak for yourself, Freddie. No.
Exactly. If you're perfect, you wouldn't bother incarnating. You don't need to incarnate. So we come here to work on ourselves, but at the same time, we're part of the big cog called humanity, and that has rhythms and patterns. And the Indian people, of course, are very good about this, about their yuga cycles. And they go back 16,000 years. I don't know how they did this. It has to be part of the folklore and the experience, because they talk about a time when the Earth went backwards, as do the Egyptians, by the way. Sometimes something big hit the Earth, and the poles actually switch places. The Hopi talk about that. And then there are these cycles within the cycles of which humanity comes in every 4,500 years and goes through a specific collective experience. For the last 4,000 years, we've been experiencing the fall of the lunar culture, which is a very feminine culture, to a solar masculine dominated culture, because we want to explore how it works. That's all there is to do in the universe, is to have an experience. You don't have to believe me, but you just have to accept that as being the truth. And believe me, your life becomes so much easier to handle if you just accept that as being the truth. It worked for me, by the way. I don't know what's going on, but I'm having an experience. And my experience is to be here at the end of this next 4,000 year phase of human experience, watching everything fall apart. And it's not the first time it's fallen apart. It's fallen apart many, many times. And if you look at what the ancestors were saying, is the reason why we looked at the sky so much and we commemorated these in big temples around the world, sometimes covering as much as 140,000 years. I mean, why do you need to build a calendar that's 140,000 years long? You'd be dead by then, and so would everyone else along with it. If you want to build a calendar, get some sticks, put them into the ground, and you know where the sun and the moon are going to be. You can plant crops. No, because they understood cycles. The idea was to prepare. And I remember a story from the Waitaha in New Zealand about 5,000 years ago, which ushered in this era of solar energy, solar power, was when the Earth was hit by a massive solar flare, as it tends to do quite regularly, and it set fire to huge tracts of the planet, and the whole of the eastern side of New Zealand on the South Island was burnt to a crisp. Now, they survived to tell the tale because they understood what was going on. They paid attention to to nature, and they could also calculate where the Earth was in relationship to the solar system, to the sun, where everything was in relationship to the galaxy, because they knew everything about the sky. And they figured, okay, in a couple of months, we're going to be hit by lots of cosmic rays. A lot of places are going to be burnt to a crisp, so let's get some food, some water, and we'll find shelter in these natural limestone caves. The caves are still there. And then a month later, they came out, found everything burnt to a crisp, and they got on with their life. That's the difference. If you are prepared, luck will favor you in terms of survival. And that's why we paid attention to these cycles, because if you understand where you are in the cycle, you can prepare and you can tell the story to the next people that come along. So the next generation will know to look for the signs, and they'll make the experience much more easier to navigate. It doesn't mean that you can't avoid difficulties, because difficulties are part of the, part and parcel of being here on Earth. This is why we came here, is to develop ourselves. We're given challenges, and you have to do the best you can. That's what it's all about. So the idea was that if you're living in specific cycles, it's all part of this clockwork movement of when certain groups of people incarnate on the Earth, and then you go through that experience. So right now, everything's falling apart because we're moving to another level of experience. The Maya know about this. There's a 60-year window. So if you were waiting for the world to die in 2012, I got news for you. You should have paid attention to the Maya, because they said, no, nothing's going to happen on 2012. That's the midpoint of the cycle. There's a 30-year window and another 30-year window. And if we don't hit a critical mass in understanding where we are and where we want to go as a collective, the window starts closing. And as the window closes and you're not hitting the critical mass, the Earth is going to show you who's boss. And right now, there's no, let's face it. You're in the middle of a cyclone right now, I believe, heading towards Brisbane. And half the country is usually on fire, from what I hear. So's half of the planet. And what did the last Yuga cycle say? This world that we're in will come to the end because of fire. So we have global warming, we have fires going out of control all over the planet. And we see how this is actually changing into the next cycle. So the ones that are paying attention will get through this, okay? The ones that know how to prepare accordingly will survive. And the other ones will perish just like before. So we are part of this big cycle that is designed for a specific experience. But here's the fun part, and it's quite sick humor on the part of the universe. You won't know until you actually die what the actual experience is all about. So Dante, when you wrote the Divine Comedy, was absolutely right, I think. You have to take it with a bit of pinch of salt and with a bit of humor, that you have the experience and you forget why you came here. But as long as you do the best you can and don't beat yourself up when you get it wrong, just don't learn to make a habit of falling flat on your face regularly, you're doing really well. Don't worry about what the other guy's doing. Worry about yourself and how you're treating yourself in this particular cycle, and you'll get through it just fine. So I'm a big believer in these clockwork cycles, because so many people that were here long before us, the Hopi, the Aboriginal people, the Indian people, and the Tamil culture, especially of southern India, they talked about that a long time ago. And they were smart enough to let us know how it works, so we might as well pay attention to people who live through these things to tell the tale.
Inspired souls, lumen beings, what are you taking away from today's episode? Join in on the conversation in the comments below with Freddy Silva. My goodness, there is so much around here around spirituality, dialing it in, learning to speak to spaces, altar creation, and really just all these ancient civilizations and the temples that they created and understanding our relationship with nature. What are you taking away from today's conversation? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. This is the second time Freddy's been back, so he's likely to be back again in the future. Touch wood, and so feel free to ask any questions you have of Freddy in the comments below. Last episode, he actually replied to some of the comments in the comment section, so you might get a direct response from him. Or if you don't, and some of the questions I could be honored to be asking on your behalf in the next episode. So leave any questions you have for Freddy, any comments in the comments below. It's really fascinating for me. One of my deepest, just because, well, I guess being Indian, there's this awareness that seems to be lost, but not really lost. It's, that the southernmost part of India was actually connected to Africa, and the South Indian people were actually very, like, there's a close sort of, I don't want to say archetypical sort of relationship to Ethiopian individuals. And actually, they actually share like this real deep current of like what's manifesting, and the spiritualities are similar as well. And it's fascinating to think about as the world is, the geotectonic plates are also shifting and the earth is kind of having its breathing, and how some of these sites are moving closer to and further from, and also just, the dynamic dance between some of these metaphysical sites as well. And I wonder what that's doing for the energy of the planet.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's all part of a big organic mess, which at the same time makes absolute sense. I think the Earth itself is also trying to understand itself as an organism, and we're children of the Earth, so we're understanding how to live with the organism, go share that experience, and then raise our experience with it. So it's kind of complicated, but at the same time, kind of simple when you boil it down to its lowest common denominator.
Organic. Yeah.
Exactly. It's very organic and very fluid. You just have to be recognized that you are a child of the planet. The planet also has to evolve. It's a breathing organism, and it thinks. It knows what it's doing. It has to regulate and self-regulate at certain periods, because it's trying to also adjust itself to what happens in the solar system and beyond. We're not just alone drifting through space. Whatever happens on the other planets and their positions relative to us has an effect on the planet itself. And objects coming through the solar system, meteorites, asteroids, they too play a part in that. So the Earth also has to adapt whenever it gets hit or it has a near miss. All of these things are down to energy. That's what it all comes down to. And the fact that, you talk about the Tamil, it's also the fact that the sea levels have been rising for the last 16,000 years, on and off, some more dramatic than others. But if you read a lot of the yugas, and they talk about the sangams, or the academies of knowledge that the gods used to live in, that there were 5 other academies before the present one in present-day Madurai on the southern coast of India, which ironically, the sea level is almost right up to it. And they said that there were 5 other academies, and each academy lasts roughly 4,200 years before it's, and I quote, subjected to a transgression of the ocean. So 5 academies, 4,000 years each, that's already 20,000 years right there. That tells you how old this information is. So whenever they prepare for another catastrophe, the academy moves further inland, and it used to be in the Maldives at one point, I believe, which are now basically a string of islands. But if you look at the sea level, you can see how Sri Lanka used to be almost part of the Maldives. We can't really tell for sure because of erosion as well and sedimentation, but it would have formed a very large continent in the middle of the Indian Ocean back then, of which we know so little about the Indian Ocean, by the way. And I hear these stories in Polynesia as well about how, in the old days, all the islands, they weren't islands at all. They were actually the tops of the mountains where the landmass used to be. And I do believe a lot in the Maori and Polynesian traditions. Why would they make this up? That back in the day, even 12,000 years ago, there were great seafaring people that went from A to B across the Pacific as easily as you and I go shopping from a can of baked beans at the supermarket. Why? Because they understood nature. They could sense the water. They knew the stars. In fact, I was in the Te Papa, which is a wonderful museum in Wellington, in New Zealand, which I love going to. I always like learning something about another culture because it teaches me so much about my own. And one of the things I loved hearing are the Maori stories of navigation. And about 20 years ago, there was a famous gentleman, I don't remember the name, set sail, I believe, was from Hawaii, and no compass, no charts. He just took some drinking water and some, I think he had some cord at the back of his catamaran, or his waka, his canoe, and to grow muscles. That's how they kept themselves alive during long sea voyages. They grew muscles on strings behind their waka, which I thought was incredible. So he got sushi every single day. And basically, he went from Hawaii all the way to New Zealand just by looking at the stars, observing the actual viscosity of the water, because there's a point in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where several currents, I think it's something like 6 or 8 currents meet. And unless you know how the water works, you'll get the wrong current and you'll end up in Madagascar or Japan. You have to look at the way that the octopus, as they call it, behaves and go, oh, that's the current I want, and that'll get me to New Zealand. That's all he knew. And he eventually, I think it was 2 weeks it took him, or 3 weeks, and he arrived safely in New Zealand and goes, great, I'm hungry, let's go and have a beer and have some proper food. So, and this stuff comes from a long, long time ago. If you look at the way they built catamarans in Samoa and Tonga, this blueprint has not changed since the time when the gods were designing it, and they would beach their canoes there once in a while during a storm. And they said, hey, where'd you come from? Oh, we came from the big land in the east, Kainga Nui Nui, which I found out was actually Lake Titicaca and Tiwanaku. And I said, well, that's a journey of something like 5,000 miles. They said, yeah, so. And they finally worked out, the locals worked out, well, if we just copy the canoes of the gods and get the right shape of sail, we can go from here to there. And that's how Polynesian people got around the middle of nowhere, because they could. They had the technology to do so, which was borrowed and imitated from the gods. And they're very proud of it still. You know, it's like, yeah, they got it right. We would have to change anything. So we just borrowed from them, and that's how we got around. So, yeah, it's amazing what you find after a 2-hour trip to Te Papa.
I mean, part of me wants to just ask the question if Atlantis is buried in the Pacific right now.
Oh, no, that's something else. That's in the Atlantic. That's why it's called Atlantic. It's the Azores, basically. That's the Atlantis. But at the same time, and again, this comes from the traditions around the Pacific, and they all connect, by the way. All the stories connect. They said, well, and in South America, they were saying, well, there's no such thing as Lemuria. That's a word that was made up, but there was a big landmass millions of years ago called Mu'ul, which is what the Maya called the big land in the middle of the Pacific, which is now basically atolls and islands. But that broke up over many hundreds of thousands of years to the last point we get to the Ice Age. Lemuria, or Mu'ul as I prefer to call it, was actually a string of big islands, much more than we have today, because the sea level rose 300 feet at the end of the Ice Age, so all that vanished. And the Native Americans, the Hopi called them, one of them Kashkara, that's where they came from. In South America, they came from Lapukije. So there were several islands already in the middle of the Pacific by the end of the Ice Age. And there was a New Zealand gentleman who was the head of, I believe he was head of Auckland University back in the 20s. He actually found a map of the original Pacific with all the land masses still in it from a cave in China that was found accidentally by a monk that was guarding the cave. You know, he kind of leaned on a wall and he went through the wall because the plaster had collapsed. And there was like thousands of scrolls written in some dead languages, which this guy had to learn. But among them was an actual map of the Pacific 12,000 years ago. And he's mentioned this during his tenure at university. So, of course, he was pushed out from his university seat because, oh, no, it's just islands. These are just natives talking absolute nonsense. Why would they make this stuff up? I mean, their survival depending on knowing where they were going around the Pacific. They didn't just make up a map because that could be the difference between life and death. So anyway, he was about to publish all this information, then he dies of old age, and I've been trying to figure out where his box of all these manuscripts were and the map. And I was told that his family sold the map and the box of goodies at some yard sale. And I thought, why do I think that this story doesn't quite add up? And not that they're not telling the truth, but I was talking about this at a presentation in, where was I? In Christchurch, I believe. Yes, last year. And there was a lot of Waitaha in the audience. And again, they're blonde, lighter skinned, lovely people. I adore them. And I think they like me too, which is nice. And one of them said, I can tell you where that map is. I said, where? It's actually in one of the subterranean rooms at Te Papa in Wellington, because I used to work there, and I saw the map, and I also saw people working in academia that were falsifying the map. So there may be two versions of the same map. You've got to be very careful about that. So I've got someone on the inside. I'm working on this because I was trying to move to New Zealand, and then everything got cut short for lots of reasons I won't go into, but I'm trying to deal with it right now. It's still my focus is to move permanently to New Zealand. And so I've got people around Te Papa working on the inside to get me into that room, or I'm going to send them to that room where they can find that map, and pretty soon we'll have the whole story coming out.
Wow, so
That would be
fascinating.
cool.
Lemuria. Oh, that be cool? That'd be
Yeah.
cool.
And
And so
I love proving people right who have been here longer than Europeans, okay? And it's not a racist thing, it's just an observation, because Europeans, so much of the history of the world is written from a European point of view, when they thought at the time that Europe was the high point of civilization. Well, forgive me for saying this, but in the Middle Ages, the main item on the menu in Europe was human flesh. There was cannibalism in Europe. There were a bunch of knuckle-dragging idiots running around. The Arab people were light years ahead of the Europeans, and the Pacific people were light years ahead of the Arab people. And the more I go towards the Pacific, the more I realize this is where the hub of civilization began, as we understand it. And we've been going downhill ever since, or reshaping it in another way. So when we get handed history as we know it, it comes from a European point of view, and not much has changed in the last 200 years. That's what's frightening about it. So I want to hear what the locals have to say about this, and I believe that they have a better story. And it makes sense because it all tracks around the world through different countries. So it's more than a pleasure for me to go around collecting stories from Indigenous people and saying, I'm just a platform, okay? If you want me to say something, give me the information. I will publish it on my platform, and you get the credit. I'm just a mouthpiece. It's not my opinion. I just like stringing things together as I go around collecting stories and going, hey, did you realize that the people in South America call this island in the middle of the Pacific by the same name that you in Central America call it as well? And they went, wow, we didn't know that. And by the way, did you know that the Maya means water? If you go to Egypt, if you want a glass of water, you ask for Maya. So how does the Egyptian language end up in Central America? And they'll go, oh, they used to come here all the time. You see what I mean? You have to travel and talk to old people to understand what was really going on.
Freddie, where do you think the cradle of like people have this real awareness that Africa is like the birthplace of the human being in some ways? Do you carry that? Like, have you contemplated like where we originate from, or is that too far back a question?
I don't think we'll ever find out, and it doesn't matter, really, because every new turn of the spade reveals something different. I think Africa's almost being eclipsed now. There's stuff in China that's coming up, which is even older. The Denisovian line is also proving to be kind of uncomfortable, that we've discovered another aspect of civilization and a species that we didn't know existed. Now we find out in Bulgaria, in the center of Europe, which we think is very young, we just found a metallurgical center and bones of people who go back 200,000 years. All of this is changing all the time. Now we realize in North America, where they said, "Oh, native people only came over during the land bridge at the end of the ice age." No, the native people said, "No, we were here a long, long, long time before that. There was no land bridge. We were already here, and we came here by boat." And now they're discovering the boats, they're discovering the sedimentations that shows that, the Americas were populated long before European academics said that they were. So I don't think it really matters in the end, because humanity's been here in various ways, shapes, and forms for millions of years. But because the information is 30 miles below the present building in which you're standing, unless you dig up every fragment of the face of the earth down to the bedrock, you'll never really know what really happened. I mean, think about the fact that in the middle of the Pacific, there's I think there's an island called, I'm going to hate myself if I don't remember this. I'm going to hate myself because I don't remember it. Anyway, it's a small island in the middle of the Pacific, not far from the Marshall Islands, and they found coal deposits. Well, that means there had to have been a forest in a big landmass in the middle of the Pacific over 3 million years ago. Okay, so only by stumbling upon this did he realize the island is not a little coral reef. No, it's part of something much bigger. And there's also these ruts that, like cart ruts, on the limestone of the island. They go into the Pacific and they reappear 35 miles away on the next island. So if you do the math, the cart ruts go under the Pacific for about 1,000 feet, which means that you've had to have been here over 200,000 years ago for someone to be making a road between these two, which were then hills, not islands. So I think the history of humanity and civilization is far, far older. We'll never really understand it. And I think as long as we're obsessed with race or anything, I think that we really are barking up the wrong tree. It's pointless. At least from my point of view, I'm much more interested in to find out what these people experienced and what information did they leave us for the 21st century when we've completely lost the plot. What can we learn from them? That's what I think is more important.
What do you think we can learn from them?
Mindfulness. Stop giving your life away to these little rectangular things called smartphones. They're smarter than you, and they're making you dumb. They really are. I mean, I used to use a smartphone for making a phone call. That's it. Sometimes, if I don't have my camera, I'll take a picture or I record a voice memo. And I have 50 days of music on my cell phone in case I get stranded in a desert island somewhere and I have my music. Apart from that, I don't need to go and waste my life, sitting there doing this, completely lacking mindfulness of the world around me. I keep telling this story. I keep saying around the corner. In America, everything is always around the corner, even though it's 6 hour drive. In New Jersey, where a hurricane came through about 10 years ago, there was people panicking because they didn't know where to buy water, bread. The electricity had gone out because it was all knocked out. And because they were so used to getting the information from these smartphones as to where to buy a pack of orange juice. So all they had to do was walk 2 blocks and they would have been at a 7-Eleven. They would have got water, bread, coffee, hopefully, and they would have been able to survive. That's the problem. We have lost the ability to interact with the planet that gave us birth, and that's the biggest Achilles heel we've had ever in the history of humanity. Most people just don't know what's going on around them, and I usually have this little trick that I play at my workshops of mindfulness. And people walk in, and I said, "So, you think you're mindful?" "Oh, yeah, okay. Can you name 10 sounds that you heard in the last 15 minutes? And there's a whole quiet in the room. If you can name more than 2, you're doing really well. 3, pretty well. And I said, well, go out of the building. I want you to think about this. Go around, just walk around for half an hour and be mindful, okay? Don't just observe, listen, okay? Hear what's going on. Come back half an hour." And they came back and I said, right, name me 10 sounds. And they can't stop talking because they've extended their awareness to the point where they can hear a worm being picked by a crow on the other side of the street. They can hear the grass growing. Someone's putting some washing out. There's a milkman down there. Someone's trying to start a car. Suddenly you become much more expansive. And this is so simple. And after that, you can start seeing things with your peripheral vision. And then you're psychic. You can see actually invisible people in front of you. If you keep developing this protocol, very simple protocol, you become one with your environment. That's what happens when you're not at one with your environment. You become out of ease with your environment. You become diseased with your environment. You are diseased. That's the one thing we can learn from our ancestors, is become mindful of where we are, what's happening in the world around us, and the big picture of the universe. NASA does a very good job of that for us because they keep telling us of how many near-Earth objects are going past every day, and the big ones that are coming in only 3 years' time, one of which I think is in 6 years, has a very good chance of hitting us, and it's not going to look very nice. So this is what's missing more than anything else, is that understanding of the rules of nature and engage with them every single day, because suddenly you realize how powerful you are and how much in control you are. And aside from that, it's what you learn in the temples. The temples are the actual books in stone. If you took the measurements of certain buildings, you can understand how the earth works, how the sun works, how the moon works, and that's all you need to survive, really, how these 3 bodies interact with each other. Then it's the actual stories that come with the teachings, which are remembered in traditions like the Egyptians or the Japanese. One of them is called the 17 Ways of Ise in Japan, the original 17 teachings brought by the gods that survived the flood, who always arrive in groups of 7, led by one charismatic leader, no matter where they appear on the planet. And these are the foundations of our religious tools today, even though they're being usurped by organized religion. But the fundamental principle of love your neighbor, don't kill anybody, don't do anything stupid, and do unto others as you would have done to yourself. These are the foundations of civilization, and we tend to forget about this stuff. So whenever people ask me the same question at conferences, I'll say, well, I wrote 9 books. It's filled with all of this stuff. What would you like to do with it? Well, when's the change happening? Well, when would you like to put this into practice? You can't wait for people like me to show up. You have to put this into practice in your daily life. And then you become an example to somebody else. They become an example to somebody else. And before you know it, the change is already here. That's the way it's always been, and it's not going to change in any other format. Sometimes you get people in the modern era doing things with film, like Star Wars. It's a great way to define the initiate who starts off in the light. He is seduced by the dark side because he falls into fear of losing his wife and his baby. Yeah, that's pretty reasonable. But if you fall into fear, you're lost. And that's the teaching. So when he becomes Darth Vader, he goes completely to the other side, does some really horrible things. What brings him back? Meeting his long-lost son sparks that light that's still inside him. And at the very end, at the point of death, he redeems himself. That's the story of the biggest spiritual tradition on the planet, and everybody has that story. Whether you're in the middle of Africa, the middle of Mongolia, it doesn't matter. They just keep changing the scenario and the names of the people, but the method is still the same. It's like you come here with the light, you get seduced by all kinds of nefarious forces because that's what you came here to do. Then you suddenly become aware of because there's a book or a teaching or something that you've come across, and you go, oh, and that rekindles your light. Or not. You can go back to being, a lemming and jump off the cliff with everybody else. But if you're lucky, you'll pay attention to these little signals, and you go, oh, that's interesting. And then you apply them in your daily life and you become aware and awake. That's the one thing that I always keep pointing back to. Is it's not that difficult when you think about it. And these form the foundation of our spiritual teachings today. No matter what verbs, adjectives, and nouns are using, it really boils down to the same principles.
Hey there, Inspired Souls. One of the things we're talking about here with Freddy Silva today is a lot about energy and currents. And for those of you that are aware about grounding, you can understand how important that is in terms of all the electrical charge that we pick up from the sun, from the world, and just our day-to-day 21st century living, all the devices and stuff like that. The Inspired Evolution is proud to be in partnership with Unearthing.com. Clint Ober and the team over there have developed some really amazing products which help you ground passively without having to stick your feet in the earth. Naturally, there's nothing better than sticking your feet in the bare earth, but obviously we can't always do that. And also they've got products which my favorite is the sleep mat, and also a mat for your office where your feet sit on your office. You put your feet on the grounding mat, make sure it's plugged into a wall outlet, and you're literally grounding as you're working. Yeah, for me, there's all these studio lights and all this sort of stuff, a lot of electricity coming through, but always grounding as I'm sitting here present with you in this office, right? And obviously in the bed, there's a mat that they give you for the bed, which is obviously an amazing product because you spend 8 hours, hopefully, sleeping throughout the night, right? And you can ground as you rest using the grounding mat. So we'll put a link to that. They've offered everybody here at the Inspired Evolution with the discount code INSPIRE, you get 10% off anything and everything at Unearthing.com. So you feel free to check that out, and hopefully that supports you on your path going forward. Freddy, you've spent 30 years dedicating yourself to this work, then some, I would say. It's your life's work. So for those that want to start to open themselves up to greater understandings of ley lines, these energetic currents that are running through the planet, you've mentioned that, hey, awareness is really at the heart of all of this, and coming back to that awareness and that understanding. For those that want to explore more their relationship with being able to understand the energy of the planet, the geomagnetic type sort of stuff, is there a bit of a prescription for them? Because I'm sure some people tuning into the podcast are going to want to maybe follow in your footsteps a little bit.
Well, ley lines are geometric alignments; they're not energy alignments. I don't know who started this nefarious conspiracy theory that ley lines are to do with energy. They're not. They're just geometric points between three or more locations which share a very similar history or purpose. The telluric currents are the energy currents. They're tied into the magnetic field. They're tied into the solar wind. Everything is connected energetically. And usually, what I tend to do is to go in a state of mindfulness. Again, if I'm in the middle of the desert, let's say I'm in somewhere near Uluru, since we're in Australia, featureless desert. And I go, well, how do I find the telluric currents? Because I am full of telluric current as well. I have iron flowing through the veins of my body in the bloodstream, and that conducts also an electrical current through the body. That's what keeps us alive. So I'm made of the same stuff. Now, all I have to do is just walk around listening to the land. I'm going, okay, I hear a little bit of whisper there. Over there, I can hear a snake slithering. Here is a crocodile about to open its mouth. There's a bird over there. There's a kookaburra. There's a car moving down there about a mile away. So suddenly your sense of perception expands. Well, now find out what's happening to your body as well. And the way I usually look for telluric currents, the way I used to, because I can see them now, and it's just a natural development of doing this year after year after year. You become very sensitive visually as well. And I just go, okay, I'm going to set my intention to looking for the Earth's telluric currents. Set that as the intention, so your body knows what it's looking for. And it's going, okay, because your interior monologue knows better than you. It's light years ahead of your brain. And it goes, oh, that's what we're looking for. Let's concentrate on that. And then watch what happens to your body. There'll be certain places where your footsteps take you. And you can't intellectualize this, by the way. Thinking your way through this will get you nowhere. Just go around expecting nothing, and suddenly you feel like the air is very different. It's translucent. There's a certain paperless quality about it. It's hard to put into words, but it becomes drier or wetter relative to the other environment. And the perception of color is a little bit different. There's also a certain pressure as well. When you get to the point where the currents actually cross, things become much more wet. That's the way I like to call it, because when you go up to these spots, it's as if you can actually touch them, and there's a ripple effect on the palms of your hand, because that's where most of your electrical current happens to be, right on the palms of your hand. This is why prayer, when you do this, it's very important. You're connecting two circuits together. Well, if you just rub your hands like this, and you get those electrical points energized, and you walk forward like a bit like a lunatic, actually. It's kind of fun, because people stay away from you if you walk around like this. And it's really good. If you behave like an idiot, people leave you alone, which is good. So if you walk around like this and watch what happens to your hands, you get this tingling feeling. It's almost like you're touching, I don't know if you had this in Australia, it's cling film or saran wrap. It's what you tend to put over bowls when you got food that's you don't want to spoil. And it behaves like saran wrap. It's like you can almost touch it. There's a pressure. That's when you know you're in a specific hotspot of energy. And then your body also feels a little bit unusual. If you find out what's happening to your body, I usually call it the tingly-wingly effect. And you do get kind of tingling sensation going up your spine. It's like someone's rubbing your spine the wrong way. It's like, oh, yeah. And the easy way to do this is to go to places where you know there's a sacred site. So old churches, anything before the 13th century, specifically in Europe, is built on an old sacred site. Go to a church. Forget about the religious aspect of it. That doesn't matter. The fact is that if you walk in and ask yourself, if I was to describe this energy, is it pushing me or is it pulling me? If it's pulling you, it's very soft. That's a very female current. You're on a female telluric current. When you're being pushed towards the altar, which is the reason why it's called the altar, because you are being altered, it's a masculine current. And you go outside the church and you look at the name of the church, it's St. Michael or St. George. Yeah, it's a masculine current. St. Mary, that's a feminine current, because the people who named the churches devoted them to a concept of energy. There's people within the system that knew what they were doing, so this would never be forgotten. That's a great way to learn. Now, when you're in a country that doesn't have that ability, go and do some research. Find out where the indigenous people used to go or still go, ask for permission, and say, I want to be much more aware of the spatial environment of energy. Can I have permission to go into your sacred site? And usually you'll go, absolutely. and do the same protocol. Be more aware of your environment, see what happens to your body before and after, and make a habit of it. And the more you do it, the more it becomes second nature. And believe me, after a couple of years, you will see energy going that way. You know that it has a specific quality of masculine and feminine. Sometimes you can see the color and the direction in which it's flowing. It's wonderful stuff. So if I can do it, you can do it too. Because I started off in the same way. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but slowly, by experience and some guidance too, obviously, I was able to do what I do now quite well. And that's second nature. For me, it's like, oh, there's a current that's flowing that way, 50 feet behind me. It needs a bit of help. It's a bit stuck, so we need to go and we need to go and drag that into the ground somewhere and do a little bit of prayer and get it to move around this obstacle. Again, it becomes second nature. But it's like driving your car. The more you do it, the better you get. And compared to how you felt when you got behind the wheel for your first drive and how petrified you were, look at you now. You're full of confidence. It's the same thing with energy. It's just that you can't see it. So you think that it's more difficult. It's not, because you're made of exactly the same stuff.
You touched on something I wanted to explore with you today, which is the this work that you do clearing up these turret currents, and yeah, like that's quite a fascinating concept. That, like you just said, even just the current behind you needs a little bit of addressing. That's a very interesting awareness to be carrying. In terms
Yes,
of
it's like a side business that I do. I actually have a consultancy
for
that,
the
yeah.
management for the management.
Oh no, this is me being the management now. I actually
Oh,
have a consultancy where people actually email me and say, "Look, I've got problems on my house or my land. Can you do anything about it?" I said, "Well, give me an address. I'll take a look on Google Earth and find out what's going on." And because I've done it for so much, I can look at a map on a screen and go, "Oh, I know what's wrong here." And the great part is, I have a client right now in Virginia. I'm working with him building a big temple on the land. And I said, yeah, I picked up a couple of things which are untoward. We should fix this. I tried to do it from here, but I think it would be helpful if you went to the specific part of your little wooded area and put some water there, bring an offering. I think there may have been a murder there a long time ago. It's a residual energy. And then he emails back and says, "That's funny. I went there this morning with the intention of walking from that piece of land that I always felt a bit uncomfortable in, and I actually sat down exactly where you marked this on the map and actually did a prayer." So my client actually already knew, and he validated the experience for me, because I like getting validation too. Otherwise, you get carried away with your ego, and that's not very good. So it's nice to see that my work is actually following through, and my client, without any prompting, actually validated what I was saying. So I do a lot of clearing, just based on what I've understood over the last 30 years of moving energy around. Moving energy is easy. I can teach you that in 15 seconds. It's not that difficult. You just have to link in with the energy. Your attention and your intention is what's important. You send out the attention to the telluric currents, and they'll go, "Oh, who's thinking of me? It's this big guy over there. Oh, what does he want?" My intention is that I would like to move one of your currents here because I want to build a temple. And one of them will go, "Well, I'm not doing anything right now," so they'll move. And then you anchor the energy line current with rocks and crystals, because that's what they did in the old days. They're forming an earth acupuncture, and that current will never move. It'll move between the temples, but it won't move where you've placed it on the land. So it's something that I do, but I also clear up a lot of stuff as well with a group that I work with in England. Many groups do this around the world. We call it spiritual terrorism. Um, you won't know who we are or what we're doing or where, but guarantee that there'll be people looking after the temples to clear up the mess that people leave behind, especially with mass tourism as it is right now. I mean, before I take people into the Great Pyramid, I have to sit there at the hotel and send in energy into the building and find out what needs clearing, so that when we go into a much more sort of placid environment. Because usually I walk in there, I just want to go straight out. There's just so much frivolous interest in these buildings nowadays that you just don't want to go in there. And sometimes I'll leave it till a year before I go back to these places. But there are groups going around, and they involve CEOs, gold Olympic medalists, and very famous people, which I can't tell you who they are, obviously. And we go around fixing the problems that people leave behind. And sometimes we just do a whole week of just cleansing sacred spaces. Glastonbury is always in trouble. One week it's fine, next week it's off. People go there, do devil worship and witchcraft for all the wrong reasons of witchcraft. And then someone goes there, cleans it up, and then you got people doing the right thing. It's a yin and yang thing all the time. But it's like that with the Earth all the time. There's no perfect moment in the Earth's history. There's always a moment where, when you hit perfection, it's already started the downfall of its counter, which is complete reduction of everything into chaos. And once you hit chaos, you've sown the seeds for order again. It's always going backwards and forwards. So I wouldn't worry about it. We've been through this before. It's good to interact with the energy, because it means that you're also being of service, and you're amplifying the temples that have been here for a long, long time. And that's what makes them sacred. People like us go around cleaning it up, putting the energy back. Just as a short prayer, or even a gift of tobacco, is all you need for the spirit of the place to go, thank you for thinking of me. Because they're still there. They haven't left. They are still in the stones. They're in the land. All you have to do is give them a little bit of gratitude, even if it's for 5 seconds. And they are so appreciative. I can't tell you how many times I've been to the birthplace of the gods in New Zealand, done a little bit of work out there, expected nothing in return. And it'll be like double rainbows. And I thought, wow. I mean, literally out of middle of nowhere in bright daylight. I thought, how does that happen in bright daylight? And I'm thinking, oh, it's their way of showing off. And they do like to show off, by the way. I have a very interesting relationship with the management. It's very sarcastic, but they know where my intention is, so it's all above board. But again, anybody can do this just by going to the local sacred place and just taking a moment just to sort of say thank you. That's all you need. A little offering, if you want, a little bit of food even. And that's how the places stay sacred. It's our prayers, our devotion, our giving of thanks that keeps that energy up. Otherwise, they go back to being rocks, stones, and the energy eventually just dissipates and it just dies. And that's not a good thing, because they built this big metropolis, this megalithic metropolis across the face of the earth for our benefit. They could foresee that this was going to happen in the 21st century. We need all the help we can get. So at least we can do to remember their handiwork is to go back and honor it.
How has being of service in this way transformed you in your life?
I think hopefully it's maybe a better person. Again, I wasn't looking for any of this. I don't know what was going on. I've kind of muddled through like a bit of an idiot, which is good, because then you can't make things up. You're going where the information takes you and where the experience takes you. I really don't know what I'm doing most of the time. I'm just following that trail and go, hopefully something good will come out of it. Usually it does, or there's a challenge that goes with it. No, I've become much more self-aware of who I am as a person, what I can and can't do, my position in the bigger scheme of things, and to some degree what I came here to do. You won't really know until you physically die. I mean, that's the big joke of life. You spend a life going to conferences and reading books and listening to podcasts, trying to figure out why you're here, and then you keel over and die and go, oh, that's what I was supposed to be doing. So it's a slow reveal over time, and for me, it's been building up an awareness of where I've gone wrong, what I can do to address the situation, and also become much more in control of my manifestation process. That's been the biggest thing, to be able to control to a certain degree what happens in front of me, and it really does work. If you're mindful, it's very immediate. But again, at the same time, the more you see the manifestation taking place on such a grand level and a well-planned level, you also start developing a big ego. I mean, that one comes with the other. So you have to look in the mirror every day and go, deep breath, I don't know it all. I don't know it all. And that's fine. I don't want to know it all, because then life would be boring, wouldn't it? Again, if you incarnated, you're not perfect. So you might as well forget that you're perfect. Otherwise, you wouldn't bother to incarnate. And that's how I go through life every single day, just trying to do it better every single time, not knowing that knowing that I don't know everything, but at the same time looking back 20 years ago and thinking, I'm a much better person than I used to be. I'm in control. I'm in control of my fear, and I have been tested on this, by the way, with a gun being pointed at me, and I tell the guy just to go F himself, literally. There's a guy with a gun pointing at my head, and my choices in one fraction of a second was, I'm going to die. And I thought, no, I'm not going to die today. And it's making me really angry thinking about that. This is what goes on inside my head. I'm feeling really angry at some guy's pointing a gun at me. I got stuff to do, It's like, sod off. Or two, I can fight back, and I got nothing to fight back with. So I figured, no, I'm going to go attack the guy with a gun, because if he's going to take me down, I'm taking him down, and we're going to spend the next million years with me beating the crap out of him. And that's how I approached the situation. I projected strength when I should be projecting, going with fear. And he looks at me and he runs away. And I thought, I've just been tested, and it works. Don't take it for granted, though. There are some times when you really should run away. But I remember that very clearly as a test, because people kept saying to me, do you ever walk the talk? I said, I don't know, do I? And next day, this thing happens, and I go, oh, I guess I do. And I have been able to control my fear, which is a big problem in my family, by the way. So that alone puts me in control of my destiny. That's the best thing you can have in your life. If you are in charge, no one can tell you what to do. You fall or rise by your actions and your words, and you can't do any better than that. I wrote a book on the Templars, and it took me 15 years to research it. I found out they're doing exactly the same thing. So nothing new under the sun. 13th century, 12th century, they're also practicing the very same thing. Most of these people didn't do much fighting, and after they did, they actually put down their swords and became monks. So they found a much better way to live with nature and with life. They said, no, there's much more to life than just killing. There's something much deeper to all of this. And they went off into retreats. Some of them went on to live in a little sort of hole on the side of a mountain for 40 years to have a personal experience of God. Talk about devotion. I don't think I'd go to that extreme, but that was that person's particular way of using these tools to become a better person. And I can't find any evidence of any time when they did not become better people. They were grounded, they were connected with the source of where they come from. So, yeah, I think eventually it brings you peace of mind. And if you can achieve that in your life, I think you're doing pretty well given what's going on.
Inspired soul living beings, in order to orient yourself in your life, it can be really helpful to understand your gene keys makeup and get your hologenetic profile. If you sign up using the link below here at the Inspired Evolution, you get your free hologenetic profile by the gene keys. It's based similar to human design, similar to astrology if you're familiar to those kinds of bodies of work. But really profound is one of the things when someone gets their gene keys profile and looking at their face as they're reading their printout of, hey, this is your hologenetic profile and the character that you're assuming activating its higher purpose. This is what it's here to live into. It's a profound body of work, and like I said, I'm proud to be a Gene Keys guide, touchwood. And a link below will take you to go get your free hologenetic profile if you're curious about embracing your higher purpose here in life. So check that out in the links below. Hopefully it serves you well on your journey. I have to ask, technology, we seem to be at the cusp of like silicon, some of this technology, like electricity, and some of these really fascinating time to be alive in some ways, watching some of these things. But following your work, even you mentioned temples in the past, like you sort of see the bricks and mortar and how we've tried to patch things up. And there seems to be like initially how the temple was put together was maybe even more robust than, you know, what we're trying to sort of just cobble together. And your awareness on technology evolution or de-evolution, it's really interesting kind of just reflecting back on that element of even just temple science.
I think it changes over time. I don't think we've evolved or devolved. I mean, in some ways we devolved, but then again, 2,500 years ago, there's a couple of guys in a Greek taverna complaining about the youth of today. No one reads books anymore. No one respects their elders. The traditions have gone out of the window. That was 2,500 years ago. So we're whining about the same stuff today. I think the technology that we have today is certainly a huge improvement on what we had before, but it's not really that much different relative to the culture that you were in before. I mean, smartphones is really a manipulation of electricity and magnetism and quartz and silica, but that's what they were using in temples. And that was the qualities that were found in the temples themselves. So you've gone from a very large temple to a small phone. If anything, things are getting smaller. I think that the technology is relative to the spirit of the age. Because if we look back at where we were, let's say 4,000 years ago, you could plant in March knowing that there's going to be a really bad winter this year because you've observed the way the trees are behaving, the way the squirrels are moving their nuts in August and not in October. You know by observing nature to prepare. Today we can't do that. Even a website will not tell you how to prepare for an approaching cyclone, and there'll still be stupid people going out there taking selfies in 30-foot waves. And then they find out whether they are the next morning's headline news on the front page of the newspaper. So-and-so dies taking a selfie at the beach with a big wave behind you. I think that the one thing that's changed is the fact that we're less connected to nature and to the natural order of things. There's nothing wrong with modern technology per se, because it's there as a tool. It's how you use the tool that's important. Sometimes people use it for the right reason. I mean, I have one of the big reasons for using a cell phone. I have this lovely free app called Organic Maps, which I recommend for everybody that's on a pay-as-you-go system. I don't make many phones on my phone. I use it mostly for emergencies. But the one thing that I have is this app that you can look at anything in the world, in any map, in any location, and it's free. And the level of detail, for example, I'm about to go to France in a few weeks. I've got a whole map of the country. I can go right down this little village in the middle of nowhere and find out where to buy bread. That's incredible. And it works offline. It just works off GPS. So you always know where you are. And that, for me, is a great tool. But at the same time, you can also use it the other way and sit there on your phone, scrolling through every single day, pushing a pram, as I often see mothers do here in Portland. And cars are literally, they're flashing their lights, their horns are going, and said, "You idiot, you're going to die, and so is your baby." And it's not the baby's fault that you're an idiot. And the mother's like giving you the finger and still on the phone crossing a major street. So it goes both ways. It's like a hammer. Hammer's a great idea. I can hang up a beautiful picture on the wall, but I can also smash your head in with it. It's how you approach the tool that's important. And I think that's what the problem with technology is that it's how you approach the actual tool in the first place to go above and beyond what it's supposed to be doing. That's where we get into deep problems. But in terms of where we were 4,000 years ago, we're also using similar tools to achieve exactly the same effect, and sometimes even less so, because we were much more reliant on the world around us rather than specific things. You could learn how to survive by understanding how the world evolves around you and how you could be part of the landscape. Any Aboriginal person hearing this will roll their eyes and go, "Of course, we do that every single day," and they do every single day. If you can survive in the middle of a desert, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, I was just fascinated by things like 12,000-year-old maps and and yeah, like ancient buildings, and I was like, wow, like the technology.
I
And
know. I'd love to see that map. I can't wait.
yeah, yeah. You also said 4,200 years, end of a cycle coming through. You're here now, and you're aware that you've chosen to be here at this time. So, I mean, it's probably pure speculation as to kind of what's next. But have you given some thought to where we are, what's falling, and what's next?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the good things that I do with the group in England is that our fearless, glorious leader is also an incredible trance psychic. It's in her blood, part of the family. She also helps the police with their inquiries, which is very useful. And we do sort of a question and answer thing once a month. And a lot of information was coming through about, first of all, we get information about what we're supposed to be doing. Each one of us has a job to do and what we have to go and do with sacred space. And then we get big stories about the big picture of the universe, which is like, wow, I didn't understand that was what was going on. And then it's like, well, where do we go from here? And it's like, well, it depends what humanity is doing at the time. Any prediction is only as good as the moment in which you make the prediction, because we're all tied in to the matrix. Whether you like it or not, you're tied into the invisible universe. There's no escaping it. The thing is, if you look at the universe right now and the Earth as a set of parameters, right now, in this very moment, we're in deep trouble. We're in huge trouble. Irreversible climate change, irreversible species extinction. Even the human race is on the verge of extinction, literally. We have idiots running virtually all the governments on the planet. We tend to kick really good politicians out of their office, even though they have an 80% approval rating and they're doing good things. Because of why? Because people are listening to social media and propaganda by two countries in specific, which I won't mention on air, but you probably know who they are. And they're basically filling your head with propaganda and nonsense, and people believe this stuff. And right now, if you keep following that trajectory where there is very little leadership going on around the world, we're doomed as a species, completely finished. But I also see when I sometimes go on social media on Facebook once a month just to see what's going on. What are the snakes up to? I find 16-year-old kids finding a solution to swallow up all the plastic in yacht harbors around the world. It's a simple rubber ring that floats on the surface of the water, has a net in the middle, creates a kind of a suction by itself, and every 15 minutes it's full of plastic, and you just take it out. Brilliant thinking. So again, in the seeds of destruction, there's always the seeds of the rejuvenation itself. I'd like to think that I came here on this ride, in this particular incarnation, to have a particularly good time. I haven't. It's been particularly difficult, but I hope that I'm not going to end up, watching the end of the world again, because I've already been there. It wasn't fun last time either. But I do have hope that people will, when faced with huge chaos, that it will jolt them into doing something about it. Again, it goes back to what I was saying. When is a change happening? Well, when would you like it to start happening? You got to be part of the change. We are the change we wish to see, and uh, so right now the trajectory is not looking very good as a collective. But again, if we just keep stay stoic, be true to ourselves, and follow the traditions and the teachings, you can't really go wrong. And I see more people doing this when I travel around the world. You hear a lot of the headlines being very negative, and they are. There is a lot of bad stuff going on, but it's also because an editor in a newspaper or the television will usually put on things which are basically full of conflict, because people are addicted to conflict. Conflict sells newspapers, it sells television, because from the editor's point of view, and having worked in industry, I know this is how it works. It's not a conspiracy. They recognize that something bad is going on. It affects everybody. Let's say the Ukraine, for example. It is affecting a lot of people in Europe, if not the world, and they want to keep your eyes on this particular issue. Okay, that's fine. But in the meantime, there's lots of good ideas happening around the world, but they are basically kept out of the limelight because they don't attract as much attention. And one of the examples I always keep coming back to was a newspaper in England. I believe it was 1920s. And their ethos was to publish nothing but good news. And you think, a newspaper publishes nothing but good, positive things, That's fantastic. Yeah, it lasted about 14 years before they went out of business because people got fed up of not having any conflict. I think humans are just naturally drawn to conflict because A, it's curious, and two, because it basically connects with your survival instincts. If I understand what's happening with this conflict, I might learn something to avoid it, or maybe I can do something about it. So it's not a sort of a conspiracy theory to bring the world down by feeding us so much negative stuff. It's because there's so much negative stuff happening. But don't forget, there's also a lot of positive stuff happening as well. There was a Dutch magazine published back in the year 2000, and I can't remember what it was called, but they also published things about how to invest wisely with green technology, or banks that are very ethical and they'll invest your shares in projects which are going to be slow to develop. You won't get much of a return in the short term, but in the long run, yeah, there'll be a good a return because we're investing in the growth of things which affect all of us in a very positive way. And I thought, what a great idea for a magazine. But again, it was boring because there was no conflict in it. And I subscribed it for 5 years, and then I think it just finally went downhill because people just gave up. Because people want to see an immediate change, but change doesn't work that way on the planet Earth. Change is very gradual, and sometimes it's imperceptible. You just have to accept that if you put, a positive seed into a pot, it will grow into a flower. You just have to believe that, and the more people believe in that, the more the actual critical mass will happen. And I think we're pretty close to hitting a critical mass. I think if a few more dumb things done by certain world leaders will wake more people up to recognizing they voted for the very wrong thing that they were expecting. It's the way that humans usually work down here. If you look through history, the more dumb things happen, the more another segment of humanity wakes up, and suddenly you have a renaissance. Think about what happened during the Middle Ages in Europe when we had COVID. And I said, there's only one thing that makes you get over COVID, and that is you read a book about a bunch of people who had an even worse life than yourself. Like in England in 1665, it was the worst year to be alive in Britain because a third of almost half the population died because of plague. Okay, you can't get any worse than that. People, their flesh literally is just rotting in front of them, and then they figured, hey, it can't get any worse than this. And the next year, London catches fire, and then the British Navy is destroyed by the Dutch. It gets worse and worse, and you think, you know what? What good could possibly come out of this? The Renaissance, yes, the Renaissance came out of all this chaos in Europe through the plague. So again, just when you think things are really falling apart, they're actually setting the seeds for something else. There's already something else in the works already. So the trick is to find those seeds and follow them and give them support.
Freddie, as I bring us to a wrap today, is there something in particular that we should all be doing, in your opinion, at this moment in time? You mentioned bringing ourselves to awareness. There are sacred sites all over the planet, but also our homes are a special place as well for most of us. Is there just something that you think we should all be carrying in our awareness as we start to approach more and more of this awareness around sacred sites, portals, and the such?
Yeah, you should buy my books and my DVD. I mean, my documentaries. No, I actually do. I actually do have something that I filmed years ago, and it's a video that's now quite so old that it's no longer. It's not even in letterbox format. It's in the old square format. But the information is actually very good because it was the distillation of how temples work, how sacred sites work in 7 modules, and it teaches you how to build your own temple or your own sacred space no matter where you live. It's called temple making. So it's available now on my Vimeo channel. And it teaches you how to build your own sacred space when you can't travel to your sacred space. That's one thing. And yes, my books, my videos. But at the same time, it's to go out in the land and get a sense of perspective on what's really happening by getting away from the noise and finding a place where the signal to noise ratio is much higher. I usually take people on tours around the world to sacred places. There's like 15,000 people on the waiting list. So I now have a lottery. I get hate mail when they say, I didn't get in for the 5th time. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't plan this. The right people come when they're supposed to. It just works out by magic. But when you go to these places, that's where you empower yourself. And I watch people changing into better people. So get out into the landscape. Hear the places, even if it's just a park in the middle of a city where you feel at ease with the environment because your back is next to an old tree and the tree knows better than you. And then you go, I feel much better. Yeah, because the energy of the tree is giving you a little bit of a booster, poof. Simple things like that. Just find places in your environment, in your village where you live, where you feel at ease with your environment. And believe me, it's such a healing thing. And then when you've been there, done this a few times, connect with the spirit of place and say, I'm having a bit of problem with this. I need some assistance. Don't dump your problems on sacred space. It doesn't give a damn. It wants you to connect with it. And you can rephrase it by saying, I'm particularly challenged by the situation. I need some enlightenment on this particular situation. Is there anything you can help me with? And sometimes you'll get nothing. Sometimes I get nothing, but I feel the need to go to another place, and I go, oh, why is that? Because my body knows better than I do where the information is, and I go and sit on a park bench in the middle of a forest, and I go, oh, of course, yes, that's pretty obvious. Boom, that's it. You suddenly got it because that place has the information. That one didn't. That was designed for something else. So you listen to what your body has to say, and again, you just follow these very basic procedures. You won't need to read my books or watch my videos because you can do it yourself, and you can do it yourself. Did I just do myself out of a living there? Or
Oh, well, at the very least, I'll be putting the link to the temple making course in the show notes below. So I do think people will be wanting to trace that. But no, Freddie, even all your content on YouTube, I mean, there is so much ground. And I think that's the hardest thing with having yourself on, which is such a blessing. There is so much ground we can cover. And I've got a million other questions left unanswered, but I'm also cognizant of the time in today's podcast. So I mean, I want to say thank you for today's podcast. And yes, very much so. Thank you. And yet, this is your life's work, Freddie. Thank you so much for you. Just the way you do this work, how you
Wow,
show
there's
up.
a rich
Yeah.
goddess that will ask me to marry her in New Zealand, then I can move to New Zealand.
Yeah. Look,
I think
at this rate, you're
I
going
think
to
I
have to marry a
deserve it.
megalithic structure, and then they'll never be able to get rid of you. I love it. I love it. Hey, just as we wrap up, I had a couple of quick questions. You mentioned Glastonbury. Made me wonder about Stonehenge. What's going on at Stonehenge? Have you?
Oh, Stonehenge is so pissed off. I remember going there years ago when we used to get private access, and I used to call up and say, "This is me. You know who I am. I need private access for these people 6 months from now." Oh, not a problem. We'll just pencil that in.
Mm.
Now you can't get in. You have to, book, a year in advance, and by the time, and because of the time, the way the clocks work, people in China are the first to get the email that says the tickets are now available for this particular month at Stonehenge for special access. So by the
Right.
time I wake up in America, you got no tickets left. So it's the way it is. And I went there the last time about 8 years ago, and I looked at the stones. We're on the periphery, as you do with the other tourists. I
Mm.
looked at the stones, and it looked so disappointing. And I tuned in, and then they're like a bunch of people that, like, oh god, this like smoking a cigarette at the back of a school shed, going, I can't stand this frivolous attention. All these people taking pictures of themselves with me as the backdrop. That's how I heard the
Mm.
temple. I thought it's really disappointing. But we came back after hours when I used to know people who know
Mm.
people over there, and we go there and said, no, you don't walk into a temple like that. Prepare yourself. Respect, appreciate it, send a thought of appreciation. If you want to pray, that's fantastic. If you want to do a sound, that's fantastic. And then watch what happens. And you walk towards the stones, and the stones become bigger and they're alive. It's like, thank you. They actually expand, and you can feel this sense that you are being wrapped around. It's like, yeah, we're giving the temple its due respect, and it's reacted in kind. And you come back the next day, a bunch of grey rocks smoking behind the shed, going, oh, bloody hell, more selfies. And I remember going to, actually, in the Pyramid of Giza. I was in Egypt 4 times during COVID. Somehow I managed to get around all these roadblocks. We had the best time, nobody there. I remember standing in front of the Great Pyramid, and he looked at me and he let out this huge sigh of relief. It's like, finally, there's no tourists. The building actually was so relieved there's nobody there. And I said, I'm sorry, we have to go in. Do you mind if we go in? We're going to bring in a little bit of energy. We're going to do a bit of ceremony. And then hopefully, if it's okay with you, if we can receive a little bit in return. And yeah, quid pro quo. And wonderful. People also saw things coming out of the stones, just like I did. And people left completely wide-eyed. It's like, that was weird. I said, yeah, it was. The building reacted so favorably to us being there that we appreciated it. But yeah, you can't treat these things as a bunch of rocks. You've got to treat them like, like your cousin, or at least a cousin that you want to spend time with, or your favorite grandmother, that kind of thing. Because they do react. And Stonehenge was certainly feeling very sorry for itself these days.
Yeah, a little bit of respect,
Until
a
someone
little bit of
goes in and does
intention
it
and
properly.
reverence. Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful to watch how the intention brings the place alive and just that respect and reverence. Also, I had a question left unturned around Atlantis because we talked about Lemuria and like the Pacific. So Atlantis is the Atlantic Ocean. Obviously, that like now that you mentioned that, I'm like, how is that? How did I not put those two things together?
Yeah, you can actually
Um,
read it in the Chilam Balam, which is the Maya tradition, which is rewritten by other people and rewritten. But if you follow the story very carefully, it talks about the arrival of the Its, which are the magician priests. They are the precursors of the Maya. There's no such thing as Maya, actually. It's a spiritual ideal. It's like there's no such thing as Maori people. Maori is a spiritual practice, and you practice
mm,
that, and the more people that practice that, then become Maori. And that was a Maori elder that told me this, in case anybody wants to write me hate mail. No, yeah, Maori is a spiritual tradition, not a people. People become it when many people practice the same tradition. Other way around. If you read
mm,
the tradition of the Maya people, they said no. Before we were called the Its, and they arrived from a sinking land in the middle of the ocean called Atoll. They were into big words back then. It's Atl. And we all hear about
Yeah.
Quetzalcoatl, but there was three other people, three other leaders of these gods. There's Quetzalcoatl, there's Kukulkan, and there's Itzamna. And Itzamna is the most important one. And the biggest pyramid in that part of Mexico is in a town called Itzamal, and hardly anybody goes there. I think I'm the only tour group that takes people to one of the biggest pyramids on the planet, and they destroyed it to create the town, and there's still
Oh,
2/3 of it left. It's
wow.
an incredible thing, and there's 7 pyramids in the entire town. One of them's behind a burger joint. So this is all magic. But if you read the stories that were eventually put down in the Chilam Balam, it talks about 9,600 BC as the arrival date for when the land sank, which is within 100 years of the end of the Ice Age. So they're absolutely right. And the Egyptians had exactly the same story and the same date as well, which is a story that they gave to Solon, who then tells it to Plato, and that's where the story comes
Mm.
from. Atl is essentially the Azores archipelago, and they have found there's a veterinary surgeon by the name of Silva, of all things, who actually found it during one of his fishing expeditions. He got an image back of the sonar of the ocean floor of a pyramid, a step pyramid, about 80 feet tall, lying in about 200 feet of water. So, yeah, that's the beginning of one of the cities that drowned, because the whole thing went down this way. So some of it's been preserved. And there's something also, there's another major city, a metropolis, off the northwest coast of Cuba, and the sonar images show an entire city down there, 2,000 feet below sea level, and it looks like a Maya temple city today. So,
Wow.
yeah, these things are still recorded in the traditional experiences of the indigenous people.
Yeah, well, part of me cautiously also was wondering, like, we talked about the Great Flood and how you were mentioning also that there's going to be fire. There's like a lot of consensus around
Yeah.
fire being the next kind, and I'm just wondering what that even, because a Great Flood I can at least visualize, but I'm not sure what fire looks like,
It
and I
was
don't
more
even
to
want
do
to
with
talk
tsunamis
about
than
it because I don't want to bring it into the zeitgeist and feed it any energy. But you know what I mean? Like some part of me is curious. Yeah.
Well, it was more to do. It wasn't so much a flood as a bunch of tsunamis that overwhelmed the land. I mean, there was big chunks of rock that happened to fall into the deepest trenches on the planet, and the ballistics department at Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico actually did a recreation of what happens if you have a half-mile wide asteroid that falls as a meteorite to the Earth, happens to hit off the coast of, say, Peru, which is one of the world's deepest trenches. So it's
Oh.
3 miles deep. That rock will create a hole in the water that's 3 miles deep, and a plume that comes up that's 3 miles high. And then it falls down, and you won't know it until if you're in the ocean, you'll see big waves if you're in the middle of the ocean. The Waitaha have that story, by the way, that where the waves took out one of the waka of the gods. Another one survived to make it to New Zealand. But they were lucky enough to be in the Pacific when the meteorites hit, because they only encountered a big wave. But when that wave arrives on the shore of, say, China, because of the shelf goes up to sea level, the original 3 mile high plume of water with the impact site is recreated at 3 miles, so that when the Tibetans said the uh, the floodwaters actually penetrated the Himalaya, they were not joking. They were talking from experience, but they learned to survive. Same
Oh.
story in South America, by the way. So now we have a modern ballistics report that shows that it is possible to create massive tsunami that feels like you're being flooded. Because eventually, there's no more water than was here originally on the planet Earth. It's just that, when you throw, for example, a big lump of soap into your bathtub, the water does this. Well, that's exactly what
Well, yeah,
happened
I'm
all around
picturing,
the planet.
I don't know if have you seen Interstellar and they land on that
Oh,
planet
yeah.
and there's like that wall of water coming at them and it's just like those
Yeah.
away and it's just like that's what I'm
Yeah, it's
picturing. It's
deja
just
vu all
like
over again. Yeah.
so intense.
I covered all of this in The Missing Lands, my second to last book,
Mm,
about the stories of all the gods and what happened around the planet. It's actually very interesting because it's the point of view of all the indigenous people and how they all
mm,
perfectly line up with each other. It does
yeah.
paint a very scary scenario, but the fact is, people survive to tell the tale. They just happen to be at the right place at the right time. Incredible. To interact with sacred space, some of the rules that go with that, which is not to expect things to happen, because when you do, usually that comes from your own need to validate an experience, and it comes from your own head. If you go there prepared in a certain manner that I prescribe, then you experience the place for what it is, and what you get back is the true experience of the spirit of the place. And sometimes it can be a vision or words that pop into your head. And sometimes, in one of my situations, I actually had we were clearing this old sacred site. It used to be a mound for gathering, and then the church took it over. It becomes a burial ground, and I thought we were just there to clear dead people from graves and things. Our spiritual leader didn't really tell us what we were doing, which is half the fun. You kind of have to sense things as you go. She just kind of will tell you, well, that's coming from your head, or that's the actual experience, which is a great mark of a great teacher. And I just remember at the end of clearing the energy, there's something hanging on to my hand. And I pulled it up. I said, what the hell is this? And this sort of onion head guy, about this big, naked, with a big onion head and a big protruding belly with little spindly arms and legs. And I said, what the hell are you? And he starts complaining that I picked him up, and I just, but I put him back down again. It was the weirdest thing. And she was laughing her head off. And the rest of the group was saying, what are you laughing at? I said, well, can't you see this onion head here? I mean, I guess he lives here. He's part of the local spirit of the land. And it turns out it was. And he was just appreciative that someone had gone there and taken the time to look into his home and clear some of the dead energy that was there. And he just decided he's going to hang on to me. And we kept walking out. And he's still, hanging onto my finger like this as we're walking out. And then at the edge of the energy field that protects that mount, poof, he disappears. That changes your life when you start having experience upon experience upon experience. And that's why I think the book was important to do, to give people confidence that when they go to sacred places, that there is a real interaction that goes on. It's not their vivid imagination. This stuff actually happens for real. So that's my latest offering, what I've been doing for the last year.
Yo, inspired soul, you made it through to the end of another incredible episode. Thank you so much for your inspirations to evolve. It is such an honor to be your brother walking this path by your side. To all of you that are subscribed to the channel, just wanted to take a massive moment to thank all of you for your subscription, your love, your support. Everything you see around here, like I like to say, is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please just do take a moment. There's a subscribe button below. As I'm saying the word subscribe, it's lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. 2 episodes like this coming out every week, championing love, positivity, wisdom around the planet, and you can join the movement by hitting subscribe. Thank you so much in advance for your support. On screen now, like we discussed, ancient gods and their places and how the human being as a species came together with Freddy Silva in another episode. So that episode is on screen now. And also another couple of episodes for you to continue your inspirations to evolve. So go on, take your pick, make your click. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, stay inspired, keep evolving. Onwards, upwards, and inwards. I'll see you there.